Okay, I'm just going to introduce John now, and then I'll introduce Igor later, so you don't have to battle too many facts at once. So we have John Kabashima, who's an environmental horticulture advisor emeritus with UC Cooperative Extension. And what everybody said to me was, John's retired. And then everybody said, well, he's retired, but not really. And John has a lot of experience in this idea about how do we deal with pests and other dangerous things, and how do we go get support for it from policy makers. So he's going to talk to us about this today. This particular panel is based on the assumption that we've just heard the alarming news from Greg and Mark, and now what I called it was exploring solutions and rapid response. So what are some of the pragmatic ways we can respond to this and deal with this situation? So we're going to hear some suggested solutions from John and Igor, and then we will open it up to discussion from everybody here as to what you think are the best methods for the urban forest community to respond to this. So, John, thank you.
So how many of you are familiar with gold-spotted oak borer? And what about Polyphagous shot-hole borer and Kuro-shiro shot-hole borer? Okay. Well, unfortunately, if I come back next year, you will all be very familiar with these, because you'll be asking, what trees should we replace these trees that have been killed by these beetles with? The gold-spotted oak borer is, if I can get feedback. Gold-spotted oak borer is going to be a minor part of my talk today, and primarily because it's a drought-stressed pest. If you want more information, Cindy said, don't go into too much detail, just give them a website. So there's two websites, Polyphagous shot-hole borer, phsb.org, and then also if you want more of the science, you can go to escalinlab.org. And on this website, we have several drop-down menus. We have a distribution map where we know it's at. Right now, we have a lot of leaflets that we've developed. And we even have a little section here for updates. One thing that I put on this slide, just so I always remember to tell you this, is with all of these pests, what we have is what we call the disease triangle. So most of you who were biology majors, you've learned the disease triangle. Technically, this is a disease tetrahedron, because now instead of just a pest, environmental conditions, and a host, we have a vector and a fungus. So we have an added variable in there that adds a new dimension, which makes it much more complicated. But basically, the disease triangle says you have to have all three of these to be present in order for disease to occur, which is the expression of symptoms. In the case of the Polyphagous shot-hole borer, I just wanted to emphasize that this seems to be a pest in irrigated landscapes and in riparian areas because they stay wet. When we get to the gold-spotted oak borer, this also, I just want to mention, this is a exotic invasive pest that came in from Southeast Asia, from Vietnam and from Taiwan. The gold-spotted oak borer is actually by USDA considered to be a native pest because it's spent, who knows, hundreds of thousands, millions of years in Arizona and Mexico and never moved out. And if you go to those native ranges, it's under good biological control. Unfortunately, it appears that probably somebody brought firewood from Arizona into California. And normally, you might wonder, why didn't this happen before? Well, this is a drought-induced pest. It likes trees under drought stress. So this is not something we're seeing in the urban landscape. We're seeing this in the forests that now are under severe stress from the drought. And so the triangle here is the gold-spotted oak borer. And by the way, I'm changing that name very soon. We decided that it's killed actually over 100,000 trees in San Diego now. oak trees. And so I've suggested we change that to the GDSOB.
Uh-oh.
So if we get several years of rain, please, then this pest may not be able to, that triangle may not be completed. And it may actually go into a little bit of remission, maybe not. Once these pests build up to tremendous numbers, this triangle goes out the window, because it's like, if I throw a dart at you, you're going to get kind of ticked. If I throw 1,000 darts at you, I'm going to laugh, because you're going to be wreathing on the ground in pain. So, what we're seeing here is that we think we're going to see this change in the upcoming future, and then that will break the triangle, and that won't become a problem. But when that gets broken and we get wet years into the forest, guess who likes wet, hydrated trees? Prolificus shot-hole borer. And if we have little or really, I don't even know math very well. I counted all my fingers and toes, and I couldn't come up with that number that's just ginormous. So there will literally be, just in neighborhoods, trillions of beetles. So imagine Southern California with all of these adjacent forests, urban forests, riparian, and you have this huge reservoir of beetles that have devastated most of their food source. It's kind of like a wildfire. It's going to jump into the forest if we get a wet year. That's my prediction. So I decided that that prediction probably will happen within the decade, and that's why I retired. I don't want to deal with it. So what happened here? This thing came into the urban forest. And at that time, USDA thought it was the T shot-hole borer. So you got to understand, we're dealing with new species here. The Prolificus and the Kudo shield don't even have a species name yet. So using DNA and mapping the DNA of the shot-hole borers throughout the world, we're calling it species 1 for Polyphagus and species 5 for Kudo shield. So the T shot-hole borer is Eualacia fornicatus. So that there right there tells you it's a bad pest. And we knew that this beetle could potentially be a problem for avocados, and that was the main concern, and that's what USDA was looking at. So when it landed in the urban forest, number one, they didn't run the DNA on it, so they misidentified it. So then they underestimated what it could do. And number two, they didn't think that it was going to be a real problem. They actually watched it for 2 or 3 years. They didn't see a whole bunch of trees dying, so they walked away from it. And that was a big mistake, and I'll explain a little bit later why. For the nurseries, anything that comes in that's exotic and invasive, the nurseries are automatically regulated because they have the ability to transport something very quickly over long distances. And it was a thing for the regulators because that's their job. So it was of concern to these people, of high concern here. They were kind of watching it here, and we didn't even think it was going to be a problem in natural and riparian areas. So what happened? Well, remember that first slide was 2003? From 2003 to 2012, it literally exploded in the urban forest. And why did it do that? It did that because of the lag phenomena. So if you just do your math, you take one beetle has 20 progeny. Every generation, you get up to about eight generations, you have over 3 million beetles from one. And if they come here without their natural enemies, and they have food sources that they've never seen in their lives, most of the hosts that they're attacking pretty heavily here do not exist in their native range. And in their native range, they've co-evolved with the plants there, so you barely can find them. When they first went back to Southeast Asia asking the scientists, can you help us look for these? They go, well, we haven't seen one of those in ages. Well, when they looked, they found it. which means there's some kind of biocontrol going on, maybe some natural resistance. So the lag phenomena says that when something lands into a new area, everything's different. The climate's different, host plant material's different. And so what happened, luckily for us, I guess, is it landed in LA County and it actually took off in the LA Arboretum and the Huntington Library. So as an entomologist, that was a blessing. Because what happened is that it attacked over 200 species of trees in both of those collections. And I'm an entomologist, and I looked at 200 species of trees, and I'm like this beetle. I'm Asian. Well, yeah, that's a coincidence. Yeah. I'd never seen most of those trees in that arboretum or that library. They are all labeled. Can you believe that? So that's how we came up with that list very quickly. So this beetle's landing into this, it's like a mosquito landing into a nudist colony. It just went, oh my God. And then it did the thing called speed dating. And it found a few of these plants that it could actually reproduce in. So now it's still a threat for avocados. Now we know it's a threat to the natural and riparian areas, because on that host list were a lot of the native plants in the area. And it is just going to town in the urban areas on the sycamores and the box elders. The lag phenomena says that something comes in, and it takes, remember I told you about the generations it takes to get to high numbers? So, the first 3 generations, it didn't do much at all. It was like 20 had 20, and then those had 20. That's still very low numbers. But once it hit that 2 or 3 year period, it just exploded. And then we weren't watching. They walked away from it, and nobody was watching. People were telling me, after we started giving these talks in the 2013-14 era, they would come to me and say, hey, that looks like the trees that we cut down that died from something. And did they think to call me? No, because I don't answer my phone. So why is this such a big issue today? Because the disaster we predicted happened. So in the Tijuana River Valley, that's a natural riparian area. It's home to a lot of endangered species, a major floodplain. This is in May of 2015. These are willows, by the way. And this is in February of 2016. It hit, severely damaged over 140,000 willow trees. And one of my colleagues was in here, and the wind came up, and so many, well, it was much thicker where they were, and so many dead branches were cracking around them and falling down that they had to get out of there. One of my friends didn't make it. That was a joke. I was saying that historically, I was wondering if they have ever existed. So now the problem we're having is this urban forest problem is really manifesting itself in not only the urban forests, but in the riparian areas. UCI has removed about 500 mature sycamore trees that are about 50 to 60 feet tall, and they cost at least $1,000 a tree to remove. Orange County Parks has removed about 600 trees, so each one of them has spent, $500,000, $600,000. That's just two entities. Imagine if you take that across Southern California. So now the nurseries are really concerned because everybody's saying, they're pointing the fingers at the big box tree nurseries. Where did Haiti go? Yeah, Haiti was in tears yesterday when I told her, you're going to go out of business, I'm sorry. But if you hire me as a consultant, I know how to fix it. We actually know what we can do, but the perception is that you may be a threat, and in reality, we know that you will not be a threat. the illegal shippers will be. So if you buy plants for projects, make sure you buy them from a licensed nursery that has a good reputation. And by all means, I don't care if it's a good nursery or not, you better be inspecting plants that you get on the job site, because there have been numerous instances of that is a Phytophthora, right? Tentaculatum. A new Phytophthora showed up in the natural areas that came out of these nurseries. I'm almost finished? Oh. So now we have this list that was in 2012. Populations have exploded, so now we have 41 reproductive hosts. And these are the list, and that list includes 18 species that are native plants. And it represents 64 families. So in your replanting strategies, you got a problem. So this now occurs, the Coodle Shield occurs from the southern border of California all the way up into Ventura. And the climate maps and the biological studies that have been conducted recently at UCR indicate it can go as high up as Tehama County and all the way into the Central Valley. And the latest data indicates it can go into Florida and the southeastern United States. So this is a potential now to be the nightmare we felt, and it's going to affect everybody. And the ones that really haven't paid much attention are the water boards, because of water runoff. There's going to be a tremendous amount of pesticide use. If we're not careful, it's going to end up in the water. You saw the Tijuana River Valley there, fire hazard. If that catches fire there, it's going to be something. Then we'll have roasted leaf spells varials. So where are we now? Well, everybody is kind of like doing their own thing. And we have committees in each area. Like in Orange County, we have an emerging tree pest committee. San Diego has one. LA County has one. The university is advising and doing research and coordinating efforts. CAL FIRE and USDA Forest Health are helping us out tremendously. The ag commissioners, through their pest prevention committee, have been sponsoring conference calls. Last conference call, we had over 100 agencies on that call. Fish and Wildlife, state and federal, are now heavily involved because they just took the big hit. So a lot of funding has helped us develop the information that we've developed, but it's a small fraction of the funding that we really need to address this issue. And so what I'm starting to look at is, how are we going to coordinate something now that is not of interest? See, USDA and CDFA are not dealing with this because they've downrated it to a B-rated pest. In regulatory parlance, that means that they no longer have anything to do with it. The ag commissioners deal with the B-rated pests. The ag commissioners are all underfunded, and it's not within their true mission. So what we're running into is we have immediate needs for more applied research and management strategies, survey identification, outreach and education, and then the money to finance all that. That's going to take a regional or statewide coordinating committee. And right now, everybody I've talked to about this has suffered years of budget cuts. And they're all saying, we can't do one more thing even if you gave us the money today. So John, you asked me on the phone one day, well, what's the most important thing? Well, these are the most important things. But what's going to happen, I think, is we need to get the funding, and then we're going to need time to develop the regional and statewide coordination, and then we can get back into these areas. But the research also needs to be heavily funded, because we need to find alternatives to what we're using now, because they're very likely going to come under pressure either from the water boards or environmentalists, or we're just going to run into resistance. And if we don't come up with more tools quickly, you might as well just sit there and watch your tree die. And that is probably going to, unlike that talk yesterday, it's not going to decrease rumination going out into the forest. You're going to get really stressed out in nature. So we also need to get the governor's emergency proclamation needs to include GSOB and Polyphagous and Coodle Shield. Now, I know CAL FIRE uses like overwhelmed with the first proclamation. We're dealing with the dead pines, but it needs to be included so that eventually, as you get more time, we can get the resources and the funding that would come out of a proclamation. So, my last slide, Rome is burning, folks, and we're fiddling around, and we need to make a decision. Are we going to save our trees or not? Are they important enough to save or not? If Greg didn't do a good enough job, we're lost. It's all up on Greg's shoulders, whether he can make them realize how important this is. We need to fund our current structure, because the Department of Food and Agriculture can't deal with this because they have no money. And so if they can't deal with it, and they're not going to start reinstating some of the funding that was cut, they were cut $33 million over the last several years. So they've been devastated. Then we need to come up with a new paradigm. If we don't have the system in place that can deal with this, then maybe we need to design a new system. And then there needs to be, that's why I came, I was so glad when Cindy invited me, because I knew that looking at the program, there was going to be a great deal of discussion about communication and collaboration, and that's what we're going to need, because we're going to have to make up the response to this, because the structure we have with USDA and CDFA over the multiple conference calls and meetings we've had with them, that will not happen. It's going to have to happen at a lower level with a new structure, and then maybe with funding over time, they might take on that role again, but right now we're in a bad situation. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much, John. I think that's a quote for the histories, that once they hit the Arboretum, it was like a mosquito in a nudist colony. I like that. So we're moving on, and you'll notice, so John and Igor both know a lot about a lot of topics, but I said to them, John, you're pests, and Igor, you're water. And it was good because Igor's bio actually talked about the fact that Igor develops research policies dealing with water issues. So Igor Lacan is with the UC Cooperative Extension from the northern part of California. He's the urban forestry advisor. He's on CUFAC. He's on the John Melvin's California Urban Forest Advisory Council, which is where I met him. And Igor is smart and funny too. As we're dealing with difficult issues, it's always nice to have a little humor. So, Igor?
Handsome, dude. Thank you. So,
I got to get away from him.
oh, come on. I'm not contagious most of the time. So, thank you again, and thank you, Cindy, for inviting me. Thank you all for sticking around. I was going to say, are we having fun yet? But maybe let's see how this goes. So I'd like to talk about water, and you know, the solution for having trees that lack water is to add water. If it's not a trick question, if you're not sure about this, maybe have some more coffee, really. But I think it's interesting to look at why this is not happening. And that's sort of the gist of my talk. I made up these what I think are four elements of the problem, and I like sort of your input and your thoughts. I hope we'll have a little bit of time for discussion, and we'll go through these one at a time just to make it extra boring. But so this is the overview, why we need water for trees, how to use it, and then how we can deliver water to trees. And I want to be very clear, and we'll go through this. We are in a drought, and as Mark pointed out, we have had this continued deficit where water demand is relatively high because things are warm, whereas water supply is relatively low. So I'm not trying to suggest we don't have an actual problem, but just keep in mind some of these basic ideas as we go through. So plants need water, first of all, to hold themselves up, and I think if we leave these trees here a couple of more days, you will see what happens when they can't hold themselves up. They droop. They also use water to move solutes around, minerals from the roots, sugar from the leaves. And finally, they use water to feed themselves. And the reason this is important to you, so water actually forms part of the photosynthetic reaction. The reason this is important to you is because at least some of you have now angry clients who are saying, why isn't my tree doing spectacularly well? We've had water this last year, at least for those of us in Northern California, we've had some water. And the answer is that, of course, as you all know, we've made next year leaves already, right? We have made them now. So if we're starting with a drought, we can't make leaves. The next year, there's not going to be much growth. In other words, if you want a positive message, trees will need 1 full year to recover from a multi-year drought. And so it's really nicely illustrated on this picture. It's only a conifer here because they keep their leaves, so it's easy to see from year to year, but you can see how, 3 years passed, there was a normal year, that's this band of leaves, nice large leaves and a lot of them, then the drought hits. Now the tree didn't know it was going to be a drought, right? So it made all of these leaves, but it didn't have the energy to actually fully expand them. And then it said, ooh, okay, so we're in a drought, I'm not going to make as many leaves. But in this case, the drought ended, and now you have a lot fewer leaves, but they get just as big as before. Again, this illustration, things take at least 1 year to catch up. And in the meantime, because there's less stored energy, there is less ability of that tree to defend itself from insects and diseases. As John pointed out, there are some pests that really, really, really take advantage of that, like the gold-spotted oak borer. So that's why we want to manage trees in drought. And so just a reminder that, in fact, our landscapes, our natural landscapes sort of look like this, and we have trees. So it is possible to grow trees in California when people, some of you will encounter this attitude of, well, we shouldn't grow trees. It's a desert. Now, some of you probably do come from the desert. You can raise your hand if you want. But most of California is not a desert. We actually do grow trees naturally. So here's where we get to the first. I think that this was this idea of the trees will be fine. Well, they're probably not going to be fine. They need a little bit of help to get themselves through a drought without getting hit by insect or disease problems. The second problem, the way I see it, is this idea that we need to save water and therefore there is no water for trees. And a thing to do is to remind our various clients, our various publics, that trees are very water thrifty. That's really the most water efficient part of a landscape. And I really want to sort of emphasize this, that trees, urban trees, are really part of an urban landscape. And this includes city trees, it includes front yard trees, it includes private trees in the backyard, but it's really a part of a landscape. So if we're talking about how much water we have to apply to a tree, we're really saying, well, okay, how much water do I have for the whole landscape? Where can I put that water? And we'll get to that in a minute. But I think the first thing is to say, well, look, we really did derive a lot of benefits from trees. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. And we should try to keep them alive. And just a reminder of how this worked out. We went from a situation where we applied basically all the water we wanted to a lot of our landscapes. I mean, I know you all didn't, because you were always thrifty and careful, but some other people did. And you had a situation where if you do that to a tree, you'll get growth. You'll probably keep the tree in good health unless you actually overwater it, which we had those cases in a lot of our Northern California landscapes, and you'll waste water. So we went from that to this, right? It's a drought, there's no water, stop watering, brown is the new green, and all of the other messaging that really wasn't completely thought through. I know it's easy to, be a general after the battle Monday evening quarterback, Tuesday morning, I don't know, I don't understand football too well. But anyway, it's easy to sort of second guess some decisions. But this is where we made this giant jump from really not being very careful with our landscape water to nothing. And it's not all that surprising that the outcome is not all that good. My point is, we can supply a little bit of water to our landscape. We can direct that water to the trees, and we can have a much, much better outcome than we have now while still saving water. That's the message I would convey to our publics and our clients. And this is, if you want, a colorful conceptual diagram. Again, apologies for anyone who has trouble with green and red. But basically, if you don't have a drought, then you have tree benefits and you have reasonably limited costs. If you have a drought and you don't do anything, your current costs are low. I think, frankly, if I can editorialize, for a lot of people, this was kind of okay. Oh, I can't water my yard anymore? That's okay. You know, I don't have to weed it. I don't have to do anything. That's kind of okay, right? Well, except you end up with huge costs later. You have to remove dead trees. And of course, you have foregone all of the benefits of that tree. And then you have the other two options. You can keep applying large amounts of water and incur very large costs and keep all the tree benefits. I'm not sure that that's realistic in a lot of places. We simply don't have the water. I mean, I do want to be cognizant of that. What our landscape water use represents in statewide water use is a separate question, and we can talk about that in the evening over a beer. But still, let's agree that we have to save water. Well, I think there is one other option, which is to apply the amount of water necessary to get our trees through the dry part of the year. That's a fairly minimal amount of water. You forgo a little bit of benefits because the trees are not going to grow as well as they otherwise would, but they stay alive and they stay in reasonably good health. So that would be my suggestion, recommendation, or at least a thought. That's where we want to be, and that's that second to the bottom row, where you keep the benefits and the benefit-cost ratio really is maximized. And by the way, for people who are saying, oh, if only I had twice as much water, you know, I could do anything at all. And just to point out, the top graph is you guys in Los Angeles, and if you had twice as much water this year as you did, you would be in Oakland, where there are plenty of trees that are dying still. So the point here is to sort of remember that California as a whole, where most of our major cities are, the potential water use exceeds precipitation. The potential water used by plants exceeds the water provided from the sky. So now it doesn't mean we can't grow stuff, we can, it simply means there will be periods, there will be times when we may need to provide some water to keep those trees alive. It's simply the reality of our climate. So if anybody's here from Arcata, you can skip this, but for the rest of us, this is something to keep in mind, whether you're in Oakland or in Los Angeles. So then a technical problem. Well, we don't know how to apply, we don't know how often, we don't know how much to apply, and this is especially true of people who are concerned about the environment, who are saying, I really don't want to waste water. I have some friends, I have some clients who are not concerned about this at all, and their trees are doing great. And I can pretty much guarantee you they're wasting water, but they are applying water. And my point is, let's come to some sort of a happy medium. So one thing that we all, I think, can provide is some basic guidance to people who are concerned about trees, but also concerned about saving water. And so for young trees, remind people that if you don't apply water on a very regular basis, you end up what Larry Costello calls crispy critters. And crispy critters happen when you plant new trees, you dump a whole bunch of water on them, and then you walk away for 2 months because you were told by UC Cooperative Extension that you should water deeply. So, okay, I take some flack for this. I take some responsibility. Yes, it's still a good bit of advice to water trees deeply, but just remind your clients that if you put a number 15 or 15-gallon tree in the ground, all of its roots are right there. So if you apply 100 gallons of water to that, 93 gallons of those are going to be wasted because there's just nowhere for that water really to get used, right? The tree roots are just right there. The most water you can put in there is going to be, 7 gallons, right? So the trick is, you're talking about 5 to 10 gallons of water per watering, but you have to do that watering once or twice, or if you are in Bakersfield in mid-August, maybe 3 times a week. Right? So that's the key thing. Small amounts, very frequently. No slacking. And the thing about who can do this, well, just about anybody can do this. And I think that's another thing for those of us who work with municipalities, we have to be willing to tell municipalities, look, guys, connect with your NGOs, connect with your residents, because you don't have the staff, you've never had the staff to go out and water trees 3 days a week, right? And if you want, stupid tricks, these bags are not miraculous, but they point a person, they point your average homeowner to how much water should be applied, right? Somebody walks out with a little coffee mug because they have, they washed their apple or grapes and now they have a coffee mug full of water. There, I watered the tree. It is possible to apply too little water, so that's something to think about. For mature trees, we're talking about the functional irrigation approach that I'm saying was invented by Nelda Matheny and Larry Costello, which is simply to treat the soil under the tree as a reservoir, and you refill that reservoir on a regular basis. You refill it when you see the tree showing signs of stress. This gets us away from having to calculate evapotranspiration, having to worry about plant factors and things like that don't work super phenomenally well for individual mature trees, right? So all you really do is you determine the size of that soil water reservoir and you refill it on a regular basis. And I can help you with this if you'd like. It's not terribly difficult. It really only depends on soil texture, right? It depends on the size of the canopy, obviously. But then beyond that, tree roots go down to 2, 3, or 4 feet at most. So that's the volume you want to wet. And really, at a minimum, you want to wet the first 2 feet of soil. We can talk about this to no end if you wish. For sandy soils, the soil can hold about 1 inch of water per 1 foot of depth. For something like clay or loam soil, it's about double that. It's 2 inches of water per foot of soil depth. You guys are now looking at me going, my water meter doesn't work in inches. What are you talking about? Well, if you wanted to flood 1 square foot of this table to 1 inch, you would need about 0.62 gallons. Okay, so you need about 0.62 gallons on 1 square foot of sandy soil to wet it down to 1 foot. How many gallons do you need to wet it down to 2 feet?
1.2.
That's right. This is PhD level math. That's right. So about 1.2 gallons will get you wet down to 2 feet in a sandy soil. If you're in a clay or loam soil, double that, and so on. Again, happy to talk to you more. If you need ways to apply that water, California Center for Urban Horticulture at UC Davis has developed these couple of contraptions, the RSIC and TRIC. And the thing to do, and they give you calculators, they give you parts lists, and really the only trick is that you have to apply a substantial amount of water at one time, because you have to push that soil above the wilting point. Everybody remember their boring soil science class? How there's that plant available water that's between the wilting point and field capacity. We used to just apply water like nutso, right? Exceed the field capacity, let stuff drain. Trees are fine with that, by the way. If you let the soil dry in between, the tree is totally cool with that. It's just that you are wasting water because the water is draining below the root zone. So that's why you want to stay in that field capacity wilting point range. Anyway, ccuh.ucdavis.edu or email me and I'll get you all of the information, because the challenge here simply is to apply water so you don't cause runoff. We all know that runoff is caused by? No, somebody said applying too much water. No, it's not about applying too much water. It's not what you meant. That's right, that's exactly right. What you meant and what you said was applying water too quickly. That's right. So this lets you apply water slowly. That's exactly right. Finally, the attitude is, the city's not watering their trees. I'm not going to even go into this. You guys all know that that's simply the wrong way to look at it. The way to look at it is to say, I will do what I can to let our trees, or to enable our trees to get through a drought. Anyway, new sources of water, I think this is important for municipalities to point out to their residents. We are working on developing new sources of water. Gray water, yes, you can put your washer right in your yard. The thing about gray water is there's seldom enough of it at one go, remember, right? You have, so for mature trees, you have to have a bit of water in one go. Okay, 2 minutes. So, but you can use this water for the rest of your landscape. And that saves potable water for your trees. Again, look at your trees as part of a landscape. And then, of course, recycled water. There are some difficulties with recycled water, but if you are in a municipality that has it, please try it. Please use it. Keep track of your experiences, and then let us know how you did. Because, 20 years from now, I cannot imagine that potable water will be a major water source for our landscapes. I think we're at the cusp of this shift where potable water, which we just assumed was a default, I don't think it's going to be that way anymore. So we need to learn, we need to try things, and the time to start is now. Anyway, this is the long-term responses. Just to remind you that if we are successful in linking our trees with our stormwater management infrastructure, that basically opens up some new sources of funding. What is enormous amounts of money in urban forestry is really just another line when you're talking to stormwater people, right? Structural soils, silva cells, those kinds of things that increase soil volume. It's fabulously expensive when you ask me. When you ask a stormwater manager, they sort of shrug. It's like, yeah, of course, no problem. So anyway, and just a reminder that, as you all know, stewardship is a shared responsibility. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to take some time. And so as far as the solutions, part of the idea was what were the solutions? And some of them were embedded in what you discussed. You might want to just highlight real quick and then say, what do you think of these solutions? And John, you didn't really talk about your policy work too much in there. So that might be one thing to say that you wanted support on that too.
That's mostly, I didn't have coffee this morning, and so I couldn't think of it. But I think, right now, we need to re-look at the whole system of urban pest and urban forest, because the policies right now are not covering that. It's mostly dealing with agricultural threats. And so USDA and CDFA and even the Ag Commissioner will say their mission is to deal with agricultural threats. So when we get a urban pest, policy-wise, it doesn't fall within anybody's mission statement. So it falls through the cracks, and I call them orphan exotic pests. And if we don't change our policy a little bit on that, this is, the new metric is we're going to get one new exotic pest every 40 days. And exotic pests are, think about wildfire, because all of you think about fire. So you have embers that land, and then unless the ember drops onto good fuel like dry brush, it may not take off. So, we say one every 40 days, so all these embers are landing, but not all the embers catch fire. But when they do catch fire and there's fuel, like these trees we have in the forest, then it's a wildfire. And remember, wildfires don't uniformly burn the forest, they jump around. And so there'll always be these areas that are unaffected. And so the policymakers often will say, well, and I get this even from arborists, well, I was just down the road and those trees look fine, John. If this is a wildfire, why are these trees all alive? Because biological invasions occur in kind of a spotty manner, and then they kind of grow out from that. And it's very similar to a wildfire. So the policy right now is that if we get an ag pest, the USDA takes it and they declare a quarantine, and millions of dollars pour in, and they have incident action plans that go into place, and they have all the collaborations and the networks all set up. And then CDFA is partners with USDA, so then they are part of that. If it doesn't fall within their bailiwick, USDA doesn't do anything, CDFA can't do anything because they don't have the USDA monies, then it becomes something for the local cities and counties and landowners to deal with. So we need some mechanism to make up for that, that poor policy of nobody having anything in place to deal with these urban forest pests that aren't considered agricultural pests. And then there's always these exceptions where they say, well, what about this or that? And so then that's the other policy issue is I learned a great deal of science over the years. And when I graduated from college and went into the real world, I quickly ran into the realization that it's 90% political science and 10% science. And so that's where the policy really comes in, is that we need our policymakers to realize that, they always tell me we don't have the money to deal with that, just like that video we watched yesterday. We don't have the 100,000, but they always have the millions of dollars to take the dead trees out and all of that. So we need to change that policy. We need to start getting back to where people are looking at prevention and really looking at prevention and how it saves you money to react and deal with the aftermath of a disaster. Because when it comes down to it, you're going to have to deal with the dead trees standing there. It's, you know, at UCI, they took a bunch of trees out. Cal Poly did too. In fact, Cal Poly Pomona did it first because they actually understood the scientific implications. And unfortunately, San Luis Obispo didn't, probably because they're still using crayons.
Oh.
I'm a Pomona, by the way. So a lot of trees are being taken out in parks and colleges because we're getting severe limb breakage from the beetle and the fungus. It just totally destroys the structure of the limbs. And these huge limbs would come crashing down. And so a lot of trees that they potentially could save are being taken out because of the hazard. And we've already had one arborist who tied on to a compromised limb and unfortunately was killed. So, you know, that's the other thing. You're going to deal with all of this. You have to deal with it. Eventually, we need to get them to change their mindset and realize that, and then just start spending the money up front to prevent this.
Okay. And at this point, that's what I wanted John to talk to you about, because that's going to take, it's going to take a coalition. So are there any questions? Are there any other suggestions on how we can deal with this? Yes. And please state who you are.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Pope. I'm with the City of Los Angeles, Mayor Garcetti's office. If you were here yesterday and heard Ted speak, I work with him on his infrastructure team, and very invested in policy creation around our urban forest here in Los Angeles. Definitely understand the problem and very curious to see more data and more sort of specific recommendations around what exactly needs to be done and what's specifically impacting us. So it's both a question and an invitation. Are there resources out there that we can start to utilize to inform policy? And if not, please give them to us.
We have a lot of that information. Much of the information is yet to be developed. So we always start out with a set of questions, pretty much the same questions every time we get an exotic invasive species. We know what the questions are probably going to be. And then we answer the questions based on resources and funding. So right now, the resources have primarily come from the Avocado Commission and from U.S. Forests and CAL FIRE. But they're a fraction of the resources we need to address all the questions. So when we work with a big important pest like glassy winged sharpshooter, the wine and grape industry is interested in, we get $30 to $60 million the first year it came in. When we get Polyphagous shot-hole borer, we get 200, 300,000 because there's no big commodity or political entity that was affected. So we do have a lot of answers, and we have more questions, and I can give you the answers. We have, many of them are on the website, and all of us have formed committees. So we have a Polyphagous shot-hole borer work group that's funded by USDA Forest Service. And so City of LA is welcome to join. City of Pasadena is a member, several other cities are members. And at those work group meetings, we present the information and discuss with those members what their particular situations might be. So with Orange County Parks and UCI, we've developed a decision matrix. So they have all these questions of how do we deal with this? And so we sat down with them and designed a matrix to identify the different situations and what the particular management strategies were and the considerations to take when using which one. So give me a call later or contact me, and I'll be more than glad to
Good.
help you out.
That's why you're here, to get together.
Well,
so that's good.
but
Yeah.
we need the local people to start. We need all of you who talk to anybody in the political machinery from federal down to local to tell them when you see them, I know you meet with them on different occasions for different things, but you need to add this in there. There is this new exotic pest that's killing our trees, and nobody seems to be helping us out from government. And so when I go to the legislature in September and talk with staff, if I can go in there and they say, hey, we know all about it. We've heard it from this person, this organization. They already told me to talk to the agencies. Well, that last phone call we had 100 agencies on that phone call. So those agencies, when they ask them, what do you think? Because every time I go up there, they don't believe me. Why? So I go up there and I tell them stuff, and then they always call up people and say, hey, John was just in here and telling me this and this. Is that true? I get that all the time. My friends call me up from Fish and Wildlife. Hey, good job, because they called us up to ask us if what you said was true. So the more people who know about this and can confirm it and then bring it up, the better chance that we're going to get a budget package out of the state, because the federal thing is long way out there. So if we get state money to address this and then get local money to match some of that state funding, like we're doing in Orange County and San Diego County, we're actually putting some money up for survey work and identification and development of some a matrix, then that makes the state want to give us more money because we're doing something. We're so concerned about it at the local level, we're doing something, because they'll ask me, well, what are they doing at the local level if it's so important? And I go, well, here's what Orange County did and LA did. And so City of Los Angeles, welcome aboard. We'll invite you to our work group and you can participate.
And we have another question too from Ian.
My question might be more for Greg and Igor. It's really about Ian Hanna, Planet Geo. I'm in Denver, Colorado, where trees and water is certainly, and drought is certainly just almost as big of an issue. My question is about how you communicate the answer between the benefits trees provide on a stormwater aspect, but then the balance with drought and how the proper use of water. And just, I think there's careful wording, in answering that there is a benefit on the stormwater side, and they have the potential to do the uptake, but that, like you said, Igor, I think, anyway, I think you answered it, but I just think it's a careful set of words when you answer that question, when folks are asking. Does that make sense?
Go ahead.
Well, it's definitely, yes, thank you for the question. It definitely is a careful answer, because you don't want to minimize people's concern over saving water. Again, what urban trees water use, what proportion that is of the overall water use, it's tiny. It is truly, truly tiny. But it's a larger issue, larger debate. And I personally believe, and I think every single person in this room believes, that we all should save water. We all should do what we can to save water. So then the question is, how much water do we have to work with as humans, as residents, as homeowners, whatever we like to define ourselves as, and then how we use that water in the landscape. And again, I think if we diversify our water sources, which everybody can do just by catching that shower water, right? Yeah, it's a small amount of water. It's not going to suffice for your mature tree, but it will suffice for other plants. And now you've just opened up some water supply for that mature tree. The other thing I think that's one part of the answer. We're doing everything we can, and we're investing this little bit of water to get our trees through the dry period. Because we can't replace them. You can't, and everybody knows this, I don't want to waste time. You can't replace a 50-year-old tree, right? So that's one part of it. The other part, if you really want to, you can do the math on the back of an envelope. The number of gallons per summer that mature tree, that you're going to apply to that mature tree is really quite small. We're still, for the entire summer, we're talking about hundreds of gallons to save a mature tree. That's not very much water, and again, in the landscape scheme of things. Is it a trade-off in the West? It absolutely is. We're using developed water. We're taking water from somewhere and using it on our landscape. So the idea of wasting water in a landscape is really terrible. I want to be very, very clear with that. I'm an aquatic ecologist by training. I've worked for years on native fish conservation, native amphibian conservation. So I'm very aware of how important water is. But again, if we can do this little bit to help the trees survive, I think it's a good trade-off.
And I guess I come at it from a little different angle, which would be the functional capacity of the tree itself, the species, to intercept rainfall is different and not necessarily related to its ability to withstand drought or to be a low water user. So you can have prunus, which is, very, it may intercept X amount of rainfall, but requires a lot of moisture for irrigation. You have a Tecate cypress, which is native, requires very little irrigation once established, and intercepts quite a bit of rainfall. So which of those, do you choose? So I think one feeling I have coming out of this is maybe that there is a need to provide you with better information on the traits of different species when it comes to carbon storage potential, drought tolerance, rainfall interception capabilities, root patterns, and conflicts with infrastructure, and so that BVOC emissions. And so the features that are kind of relevant to picking trees that will be better adapted in the type of climate that Mark was indicating we might be experiencing in the future.
And just a quick follow-on to Greg's remarks. It does mean that some of our trees are not ideal. Some of the trees in our urban areas, really some of the tree species are maybe really not ideal for those spaces. Northern California, a lot of redwoods. Yeah, probably not the best species. So I had that on the slide. Going forward, our tree species should be reasonably drought tolerant. They should be reasonably compatible with recycled water. Again, well suited for our sites and for our climate and for our water situation. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, I've dealt with a lot of people that we tried to convince that the cost of water is relatively small. So actually calculated, what is the cost of 1 gallon of water? And it's in pennies. And usually when I talk to people, I'll say, well, here's how many gallons we expect you to have over a period of a year. And it'll come out to maybe $10 maximum, 10, 20 bucks. And usually what I'll do is I'll say, okay, look, here's $10. If you can't afford it, I'll pay it for you. And usually we'll shame them into the point of saying, I can't handle $10, over a period of a year or two. And usually if you put it in that context, it's a very small amount.
Social math. We had a couple questions over here.
Question for Greg, talking about water. Lee Ayers with Tree Fresno. Given that California is last in the canopy for street trees, and given that we're probably first in so much of every other thing, including lane miles of asphalt, I suspect per capita, is it time to revisit subdivision standards in California? If you come to Fresno and Clovis, an area that's a county with 1 million people, and the urban area is about 500,000, most of which was built in the last, or half of which was probably built in the last 25 years. The smaller lot sizes and the larger footprint of the homes and the land allocated to streets, has reduced the area for trees. And the park strips between sidewalks obviously are too small for trees. And yet it's like the gorilla in the room. People haven't been willing to revisit that, and that may well be part of the reason why we have fewer trees. Any thoughts? Yeah, definitely. So, and I think Lori was...
Thank you, Lee. That was my question too, exactly.
Yeah, so Ray and the Sacramento Tree Foundation have developed a, what is it called, kind of certification program for new development that is urban forest friendly. And they worked with the landscape architecture class at UC Davis and have developed kind of a set of criteria that are aimed at providing more space for tree roots and above ground space for trees as well. And the idea would be that, a developer would meet these criteria and then would be, kind of like LEED certified. This would be urban forest certified because they provided the space in the parkway and the medians and the front yards and, the bioswales. And so I think that's, if we can come together and support that and embrace that as a community, that is one way to work with the development community, and not. So it's hard to revisit ordinances and redo ordinances. And I think my hope there is to move to more of the urban tree canopy ordinance, which there's a lot of redevelopment going on in our cities, not just new development, but redevelopment. And there is really a need to save as much canopy as we can, and then to make sure that when we lose trees, we're providing, the developer's providing, more than equivalent canopy in that on-site or near the site. And I think using the canopy-based model is, would be a good way to try to get at that as well.
Okay, I think Claire had one question. Okay, we've got two last questions. Please state your name, go ahead.
Michelle Sullivan, and I'm a landscape architect with Mealair & Associates. It's really interesting to hear this dialogue happening amongst the different aspects of it, and it's obviously a complex problem. And I guess the question is this intersection as we move forward, like you're talking about climate change as time goes on, and the complexities of that, and how are we looking at trees for the future? How are we doing that research? Because we're talking about canopy cover, we're talking about obviously the entomology aspect of it, but how are we projecting? And are there symposiums beyond this meeting where we are having this panel where you're getting together to look at those intersections?
Yeah, he's the guy. So there's a handout over at the Forest Service right by where Jeff is standing that describes our climate-ready tree study. And we have identified 12 tree species for coastal Southern California and 12 tree species for inland Southern California that are not commonly available in local nurseries. They're not planted in the landscape, but they come from environments where it's very dry, very hot. And these, so like we have some from Australia. We have a Brazilian cedarwood. We have natives like the Tecate cypress, the netleaf hackberry. We have the rosewood from India. So these are incredibly tough trees, but we really don't know how they'll perform here. They've kind of passed an initial filter that would indicate that they might do well here. So they have been planted in 8 parks in Los Angeles, 2 of each in each of the parks. And then in a reference plot at UC Riverside for the inland and at Irvine for the coastal, where they get kind of optimal care. They're pampered. But then in these parks, they're definitely not pampered. We've been out measuring them. And so it's a 20-year study. We'll be measuring and observing them every year and reporting back to you on, and how they're performing. How are they growing? Do they show? One concern is invasiveness. We don't want that. Are they hardy? And so on. So we have a site right along the coast. So, for example, we have a red push pistache, really a tough tree, but the salt spray is maybe a problem with that. So that's what we're working on now.
So that's addressing the idea about what the species should be.
Yes.
Should be as we go forward. I think part of the question I heard was, what should we be doing now to work collectively together on this? Because there's all these different sides of this question. There's the policy question. There's the, and I'll throw this out. Miranda's in the room, but there was also talk about, we're sitting here literally saying that Rome is burning. Which I kind of like that when John put that on the slide. California's burning, and so what do we do to move forward after this discussion right here? One idea that came up was that we have a group, and I know that John's got this group of 100 agencies, but maybe an urban forestry group that gets together on a fairly regular basis via phone, and a working, I don't want to use the word working committee, but a community practice or something that gets together and it's facilitated. And we were thinking about maybe having the LA Urban Center be very much involved in that. So I'm throwing that idea out. We will be in touch with you after this. We have all your emails. So think about whether you want to be a part of that. We're not trying to say you're going to get together every week, but regularly to say, who should we be in contact with? How do we get Jennifer Pope the information that she needs? She tells us what she needs, and then she tells us who are Mayor Garcetti's friends throughout the state that we should be talking to as well. And then I know, guys, that we're overtime again, but Rome is burning, and I have a hard time breaking for lunch, or for break, but we're going to do that. We have 2 other questions. Claire, please come with yours, and then Erin is absolutely the last. Okay.
Thank you so much. It's a follow-on to what you're saying. It's the theory.
Get close.
Claire Robinson with Amigos de los Rios in East County, Los Angeles. Follow on to what you're saying. A theory practice question. When you were talking, I started to hyperventilate and feel like I was going to pass out because we're channeling hundreds of thousands of dollars of state money to urban forestry as a nonprofit entity. The county is asking us for help. There's a part-time arborist who's in a bad mood because he's overstressed, lost 3,000 trees for county Reckon parks. We're asked to plant this Saturday in a hot spot for the shot-hole borer. We don't know exactly what to plant. Should we plant host trees, young ones, and try to keep them safe? Should we plant totally different things? Do we leave trees standing? Do we take them down? A lot of community is really devastated about the loss of the canopy in one of their only parks. We can marshal their support. What are we supposed to ask them to do?
And are you supposed to do it this summer?
Yeah, so what exactly can we do as a nonprofit to help our agencies, empower them, and what can we do at the federal or state level really practically to get this issue addressed, that non-agricultural pests, where's the return on investment question, to make sure that we can put the correct resources in right now. And I kind of need the answer right now because I got to go out to the county later.
Great.
Erin?
Aaron Thomas with Northeast Trees, and actually Claire partially asked one of my questions, which was the planting of natives now. I'm surprised that that's not on the list that the Forest Service is looking at, but like no local natives are on there, coast live oaks, but then again, they're being hit by pests. So the question is, should we be planting native trees given the fact that they are hosts or reproductive hosts right now? So that's the question.
I think everything has to be evaluated on the situation. So as I said, it's like a wildfire, it jumps. So we have areas in Orange County, a large park that's, I don't know why, it's not been infested, but it has huge sycamores, a major planting. And so we went into a major survey program, and then we found that it's just starting to get infested. So when you start to think about what you're doing in an area, you have to determine if you're in a heavily infested area or in a lightly infested area. The other thing that we just always want to emphasize is plant diversity. So the landscapes that only have 10% of the trees and sycamores, if you didn't know what happened, you probably wouldn't notice much. It seems something to be off, but you wouldn't be quite sure. But if you went in there with 100% sycamores, you would definitely know something happened in there. So I would say when you're planting, when you do your plans, come up with a plant diversity palette. Do not go to one species that you really like. The other thing is to understand that these trees, when we have done our studies or surveys, we gathered data showing that depending on the size of the tree, the beetles would have a preference for larger trees. So your younger trees, actually, you might be able to protect them, and we have come up with a couple of treatments. You could probably protect those trees And hopefully over time, as we do a little more research, we can then develop some more strategies to deal with those trees as they get larger and start being attacked. The major thing that I would just tell anybody is you need to be surveying your trees. And so all of the agencies that have gone to inventorying their trees and then notating pest and disease incidents on the trees, that has been indispensable for us. So Andy Trotter from West Coast Arborists gave us access to the inventory. And when we were doing our large-scale survey work, we queried that list of 41. There are some that they like more than others. And there's some that they do better in than others. And so we queried where all those trees were, and then that's how we kind of allocated our resources. And I would suggest you do a similar thing. We have a map on pshb.org that shows where most of the infestations that we know of are. And that's an informal survey, so it's not a regulatory survey where we went through every quadrant and documented it. But we know about where they are. You can go onto our website, look at that map, and see if you're in a heavily infested area. And then, we kind of list the trees that are most likely to get hit. And alternate hosts like castor bean. So we've told people, if you have castor bean, you need to get that out of there because that's an alternate host. So you can do all you want on your sycamore and you have castor bean there that you're ignoring, it's going to just keep reinfesting your sycamore. So it's a whole, we call it an integrated pest management strategy where you have to look at, cultural, physical, mechanical, all those things have to be looked at.
Okay, let us please give a big round of applause for Lisa.